Every single day for 2 months, HOA President Beatrice drove her BMW straight through my locked ranch gate like it was her personal driveway, then charged neighbors $5 each to follow her. Not around it, through it. This morning, she doesn't even slow down, just plows through, scattering my cattle, leaving my gate hanging like broken teeth. When I chase her down, she rolls down her window with that smirk. This is America. I can drive wherever I want. Your little fence doesn't apply to HOA board members. But what Beatrice didn't know was that every single time she drove through my property, she was digging her own grave deeper. See, I'm not just some country boy she could bully. I'm a Marine who'd spent 20 years learning how to plan operations. And she just walked into the most beautiful trap I'd ever set. Tell me in the comments, have you ever dealt with an HOA Karen who thought rules didn't apply to them? 2 months before I destroyed Beatrice Thornfield's life, she seemed untouchable. I'm Ezra Blackwood, third-generation rancher on 47 acres my grandfather bought in 1943 for the price of a used tractor. Back then, this was pure Texas countryside. Nothing but rolling hills and the occasional coyote. My wife, Celeste, runs the local veterinary clinic, and our twin daughters, Sage and River, are high school seniors heading to college. We run sustainable cattle and host farm-to-table dinners for city folks who think milk comes from cartons. Everything changed when Millbrook Estates invaded in 1987. Suddenly, our quiet ranch road became the border between old Texas and suburban hell. And leading that suburban hell was HOA President Beatrice Thornfield, 58 years old, real estate attorney, and the kind of woman who'd sue her own shadow for trespassing. She drives a white BMW X5 with vanity plates reading Law Quinn and wears enough perfume to gag a skunk. The first time I smelled that floral chemical warfare mixed with morning dew, I knew trouble was coming. 2 months ago, that trouble arrived at 7:15 a.m. I'm pouring coffee when I hear an engine that doesn't belong. Not the rumble of a ranch truck or the purr of Celeste's sedan. This was the aggressive whine of German engineering being pushed too hard on gravel roads. Through the kitchen window, I watch a white BMW blast through my closed gate like it's made of tissue paper. My cattle scatter in confusion, their panicked lowing mixing with the sound of splintering wood. I sprint outside, still holding my coffee mug. "Ma'am, this is private property." She stops, rolls down her window, and looks at me like I'm something she'd find on her shoe. "I've done my research, cowboy. This road predates your deed." The way she said cowboy like it tasted bad in her mouth. "My family's owned this land since 1943. You're trespassing. The HOA has easement rights. Maybe you should check your paperwork before making threats." Then she drives off, leaving me standing in tire tracks that carve through my best grazing grass like scars. That evening, I spread every document we owned across the dining room table. Original deed, survey maps, mineral rights, easement protections, everything back to my grandfather's signature. Our property lines were documented, surveyed, and legally bulletproof. There was no easement. Never had been. "She's lying," River said, looking over my shoulder at the paperwork. "Of course, she's lying," Sage added. "The question is why?" Smart girls. They could smell the setup from a mile away. The next morning, 7:15 sharp, the BMW returned. And the next morning, and the next. Every single day, Beatrice Thornfield drove through my property like she owned it. Some days she'd slow down just enough to make eye contact through her windshield. That smug smile daring me to do something about it. The sound of her approaching engine became my most hated alarm clock. That aggressive whine would cut through the peaceful morning air, followed by the crash of whatever gate hardware couldn't survive another impact. After the first week, I started noticing patterns. She always took the same route through my pasture, always the same speed, always that pause at the end to look back and make sure I'd seen her violation. "Just let it go," Celeste said. "It's not worth the legal fees." But the girls disagreed. Sage started documenting everything. Photos, videos, timestamps. River researched property law like she was preparing for law school. "Dad," River said one evening, "she's not just trespassing. She's sending a message. She thinks she can do whatever she wants because she's got a law degree and we're just ranchers." That night, lying in bed listening to cattle settling down after another morning disruption, something clicked. Beatrice wasn't just taking a shortcut. She was testing me. Well, she was about to find out what happens when you test a Marine who's had time to plan. The next week, Beatrice turned my ranch into her personal theme park. Monday morning, 7:15 sharp, but this time she brought friends. 4 cars followed her BMW through my gate like some kind of suburban invasion. I grabbed my binoculars and watched from the kitchen as Beatrice stepped out wearing a blazer so bright yellow it could stop traffic. "Welcome to our community easement tour." Her voice carried across the pasture with that fake cheerful tone that made my coffee taste like mud. She gathered her group middle-aged HOA members clutching clipboards like they were on official business. But here's what caught my attention. As they climbed back into their cars, each person handed her a crisp $5 bill. She was charging admission to my property. The smell of exhaust fumes mixed with kicked-up dust created a toxic haze over my pasture. My cattle huddled in the far corner, too spooked to graze properly. The morning silence I'd cherished for 20 years was shattered by the sound of suburban engines revving through terrain they had no business crossing. By noon, 2 more tour groups had trampled through. 16 people total, $80 in my pocket if I'd been running the show. That afternoon, a certified letter arrived. The envelope reeked of Beatrix's perfume before I even opened it. The Millbrook Estates HOA hereby demands you cease blocking community access to the established thoroughfare crossing your property. It read in legal gibberish that made my head pound. Failure to comply will result in enforcement of our easement rights. Established thoroughfare right, like calling a robbery an unauthorized financial transaction. That's when my military training kicked in. Rule 1. Gather intelligence. Rule 2. Document everything. Rule 3. Never let the enemy know you're preparing to strike back. Wednesday morning, I drove to Austin for reconnaissance supplies. $800 later, I had 4 military-grade trail cameras with night vision and motion activation. Back in the Corps, we'd use similar equipment to track insurgent movement patterns. Same principle applied here. I spent the afternoon positioning cameras like I was setting up a surveillance perimeter. Gate entrance, middle of her route, exit point, and 1 hidden camera focused on her little money collection spot. The olive green cases blended perfectly with fence posts, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Thursday's footage was better than reality TV. Beatrix showed up with 6 people, including a young couple, who looked like potential home buyers. Watching the playback that evening, I heard her explain to them, the agricultural exemption actually gives us unlimited access. This road is community property under Texas easement law. Pure fiction. But it got worse. She pointed toward my house and lowered her voice, conspirator ally. The rancher can get aggressive if you engage directly. Best to just ignore him. Aggressive rancher. She was painting me as the neighborhood menace while conducting illegal tours on my land. By Friday, I had enough evidence to prosecute. Time for the counterattack. At the county courthouse, I filed a complaint for unauthorized commercial activity. The clerk, Martha, had known my family since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. She shook her head as she stamped my paperwork. That HOA woman again, she sighed. We've gotten dozens of complaints about her. Martha explained something I'd learned during my research into Texas property law. Anyone conducting regular commercial tours needs proper permits, even on property they claim legal access to. Back when I was planning base logistics, I dealt with similar permitting requirements for civilian contractors. Same rules applied. No permit, no business. The county inspector arrived Tuesday morning. I showed him the camera footage, the money collection, the scheduled tour groups, clear evidence of unlicensed commercial operations. Inspector Johnson, a nervous man who kept checking his phone, nodded along. Yep, that's commercial activity. Clear violation. Then he paused the video right where Beatrix was pocketing cash. Although looking at this more carefully, she might have legitimate easement claims that could complicate the commercial issue. Something in his tone felt off, too dismissive, too casual. How's that complicate things? I asked. Well, if there's a property rights dispute, the commercial violations become secondary. Might want to resolve the easement issue first through civil court. My detector, finally tuned after 20 years dealing with military bureaucrats, started screaming. This guy was deflecting harder than a politician at a budget hearing. That evening, I did what any paranoid Marine would do. I investigated the investigator. Took me exactly 15 minutes to find Inspector Johnson's wife, Linda, listed as a paralegal at Thornfield and Associates, Beatrix law firm. The corruption ran deeper than I'd thought. She didn't just have legal connections, she had the enforcement system compromised, too. But that was her first mistake. See, Marines don't just fight enemies. We study them. And every time she pulled strings behind the scenes, she was showing me exactly how her network operated. Time to start pulling some strings of my own. 2 weeks later, Beatrice declared war. The attack came disguised as official paperwork. Resolution 2024-15, designation of historic community thoroughfare. Screaming in bold letters that made my coffee taste like battery acid. They'd voted unanimously to steal my road. The roadway crossing the Blackwood property is hereby designated as a historic community thoroughfare, predating current property boundaries and available for community use in perpetuity. Historic thoroughfare, like calling a bank robbery a cash withdrawal. But the real knife twist was attached. A petition signed by 43 neighbors demanding action against the aggressive rancher threatening community safety. According to these signatures, I'd waved guns around, screamed profanities, and terrorized innocent families. Complete fiction. But 43 people believed Beatrix lies enough to sign their names to them. The next morning brought a baby-faced reporter from the local Gazette, clutching a notebook like it was his ticket to Pulitzer Prize glory. Mr. Blackwood, I'm covering the community access dispute. Care to comment on allegations of threatening behavior? I spent an hour showing him camera footage, property deeds, and legal documents. He nodded earnestly, scribbling notes, asking smart questions about easement law and property rights. Really helpful, he said, packing up. I want both sides of this story. When the article hit 3 days later, the headline read, Local Veteran Blocks Community Road Access. My evidence got buried in paragraph 7, sandwiched between Beatrix quotes about my intimidation tactics and frivolous lawsuits. The camera footage showing her illegal tours not mentioned. Within hours, my phone was ringing off the hook. Real estate agents expressing concern about property values. Neighbors who'd known me for decades suddenly finding their shoes fascinating when we passed in town. Even the barista at our local coffee shop flinched when I walked in, like I might start throwing punches over a latte. Beatrix had turned me into the neighborhood boogeyman. But Thursday morning, she made a critical error. Her biggest tour group yet, 12 people, including a slick L-looking real estate agent, trampled across my pasture like they owned it. I watched through the cameras as she led them right up to my fence line where Roosevelt was grazing. Roosevelt, my prize Angus bull. 1,800 pounds of prime breeding stock worth more than her BMW. The agricultural operations here are minimal, Beatrice announced to her audience, her voice cutting through the morning air like nails on chalkboard. Just a few cows for show. Nothing that affects property values. Roosevelt lifted his massive head and fixed her with a stare that could melt steel. The sound he made, part snort, part growl, vibrated through the ground like distant thunder. Even from 50 yards away, I could smell the testosterone and irritation radiating from him in waves. That bull had more dignity in his left horn than Beatrix had in her entire designer wardrobe. Right then, watching her dismiss my family's livelihood as for show, I decided enough was enough. Time to fight back with the one thing she couldn't spin or bury. Ironclad legal documentation. See, 20 years of military bureaucracy teaches you that official paperwork beats political connections every single time. You just need to know which forms to file and where to file them. Friday morning, I drove to Austin armed with every document my family had ever kept. Original 1943 survey, mineral rights, easement protections, and the correspondence from 1956 when the county wanted to buy land for road access, and my grandfather declined. At the county records office, I struck gold. The original 1987 Millbrook Estates Development Agreement, the document that created their precious HOA, page 47, contained the magic words. This agreement specifically excludes all pre-existing agricultural properties from HOA jurisdiction and community easement designations. Pre-existing agricultural properties like a ranch operating continuously since 1943. The beautiful irony. Beatrix law firm had represented the original developer. She'd known about this exclusion from day one. Probably had the document memorized. Every tour, every fee, every lie about easement rights, she'd known it was all illegal. Armed with documentation that could survive any courtroom challenge, I filed formal trespassing charges with the sheriff's department. Not through Inspector Johnson's compromised office, but directly with the sheriff, requesting Deputy Martinez, an Afghanistan vet, who understood the importance of proper evidence. Martinez showed up Tuesday morning with news that made my stomach drop. Mr. Blackwood, your documentation is bulletproof. Problem is, protocol assigns this to Deputy Danny Johnson. Johnson, related to the inspector's nephew, and Danny's got specific instructions to classify all HOA disputes as civil matters, not criminal. The corruption wasn't just one bad inspector. Beatrice had infected the entire local enforcement system like a virus, spreading through family connections and political favors until honest law enforcement was impossible. But she just made her biggest mistake yet. Because now I knew exactly how deep her network ran, and every corrupt connection she'd revealed was another weakness I could exploit. 3 weeks later, Beatrice declared total war on my family. The lawsuit landed like a bomb on Tuesday morning, hand-delivered by a process server who couldn't make eye contact. Thornfield versus Blackwood came wrapped in enough legal seals to choke a courthouse clerk. The complaint read like bad fiction. Defendant operates illegal agricultural activities violating residential zoning, creating noise pollution, odorous emissions, and traffic hazards that diminish property values and threaten public safety. Illegal agricultural activities on land that had been ranching since before their precious subdivision was even a developer's wet dream. That same afternoon, a county clerk arrived with paperwork that made my vision blur. The HOA had slapped a $12,000 lien on my property for accumulated road maintenance fees. 15 years of fees for a road they didn't own on property they'd never touched. The itemized list was pure creative writing: asphalt repairs, drainage improvements, snow removal in Texas, where we get maybe 2 in every 5 years, and it melts by lunch. Wednesday brought Agent Patricia Voss from the Agricultural Department, clipboard in hand, investigating multiple reports of animal neglect and waste violations. I walked her around for 2 hours while she examined everything from Roosevelt's water trough to my manure management system. Mr. Blackwood, she said, snapping her clipboard shut. Whoever filed these complaints has never seen a real ranch. Your operation could be in a textbook. What about the reports? Unfounded and dismissed. But off the record, she glanced around like she was sharing state secrets. I've gotten 17 separate complaints about your ranch this month. Someone's using the system to harass you. 17 false reports. Beatrice had turned government agencies into her personal attack dogs. That evening, the real damage became clear. Celeste came home from her vet clinic looking like she'd been gut punched. 3 clients can lead today, she said, sinking into the kitchen chair. They're worried about contamination from our problem ranch. 20 years building these relationships as she's destroying them with lies. The air in our kitchen felt heavy with her stress. That sharp, bitter smell I remembered from the worst days overseas when everything was falling apart and you couldn't see a way out. But Thursday morning brought Beatrix's most brazen move yet. I was checking fence posts when voices drifted through the morning fog. 8 people in matching yellow vests had invaded my southern pasture. Clipboards ready, cameras clicking. Suspicious ranch activity monitoring. Their vests proclaimed in bold black letters. They were documenting everything like they were conducting a military reconnaissance mission. Cattle positions, equipment locations, the exact angle of Roosevelt's ears when he lifted his massive head to stare them down. One woman was photographing my workshop through the fence. Another was timing how long it took my cows to walk from water to shade. The morning air filled with the sound of whispered conversations and digital camera clicks punctuated by Roosevelt's increasingly irritated snorts. Even my bull knew this was insane. Then I discovered why they'd been watching. The new complaint arrived that afternoon. Illegal weapons manufacturing on agricultural property. According to the report, suspicious metalwork activity in my workshop suggested I was producing devices intended for property damage and intimidation. My workshop, where I welded broken gate hinges and built the occasional birdhouse for Celeste's garden. But 20 years of military intelligence had taught me to read enemy patterns. When surveillance escalates, attack is imminent. Beatrice wasn't just harassing me anymore. She was building a case for something bigger. Time to call in reinforcements. I spent that evening working the phone like I was coordinating a military operation. By Friday, I had the Texas Agricultural Extension Service, the Cattlemen's Association, and 3 state legislators who'd built careers defending rural rights. More importantly, I reached Jake Ramsey, my old Marine buddy, who'd become a federal agricultural inspector. Jake had dealt with Beatrix type before. Lawyers who weaponized environmental regulations against farmers they wanted gone. As what you're describing is organized harassment designed to force a land sale, he said, his voice carrying that familiar edge from our deployment days. If we can prove systematic targeting, that's federal civil rights territory. Federal civil rights. Suddenly, this wasn't just a property dispute. It was a case study in government-sanctioned theft. But as I hung up, staring out at my land through the kitchen window, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. All those false reports weren't just harassment. All that surveillance wasn't just intimidation. Beatrice was building a comprehensive government file documenting every inch of my property, every piece of equipment, every weakness she could exploit. She wasn't trying to prove I was violating regulations. She was mapping my ranch for the final assault. The breakthrough came from the most unlikely place, a dusty file cabinet in the basement of the county courthouse. I'd been digging through property records for 3 hours, my eyes burning from staring at faded documents under fluorescent lights that hummed like angry wasps. The basement smelled like old paper and disappointment mixed with the metallic tang of ancient filing cabinets that had seen better decades. That's when I found it. Buried in a manila folder marked Millbrook Estates Development 1987 was the original HOA charter. Not the sanitized version they'd been waving around for years, but the actual founding document with all the legal fine print. Page 47, subsection 12C. This charter and all associated community regulations specifically exclude pre-existing agricultural properties from HOA jurisdiction, easement designations, and fee assessments. Pre-existing agricultural properties like a ranch operating continuously since 1943. But that wasn't the bombshell. The bombshell was the signature at the bottom of the document. Legal counsel Thornfield and Associates. Beatrix's law firm had written the original charter. She'd known from day one that my ranch was legally untouchable. Every easement claim, every fee, every threat, she'd known it was all illegal. My hands shook as I photographed every page with my phone. But as I dug deeper into the development records, I found something that made my blood run cold. Financial discrepancy reports dating back 15 years. HOA members had been paying road maintenance assessments of $200 per household annually, with $342 homes in Millbrook Estates. That was $68,400 per year for 15 years. Over $1 million in road maintenance fees for roads the county actually maintained. I pulled out my calculator, fingers, fumbling with the numbers. $68,400 times 15 years, $1,026,000. Over $1 million that should have been sitting in HOA accounts. But according to the financial records I could access, the current HOA reserve fund contained exactly $47,000. Someone had been skimming nearly $1 million over 15 years using fabricated road maintenance as cover. And the person who designed this system, who'd known exactly which fees were legal and which weren't, was Beatrice Thornfield. The pieces clicked together like a rifle bolt sliding into place. This was never about my ranch. This was about covering up the biggest embezzlement scheme in county history. Every attack on my property, every false report, every harassment campaign, it was all designed to create chaos and distraction while she covered her tracks. If she could force me to sell, or better yet, get the county to seize my land for violations, the resulting legal mess would bury any investigation into HOA finances for years. I sat in that basement for another hour, photographing every document I could find. Shell companies receiving payments for landscaping services that were never performed, invoices for equipment that was never delivered, a paper trail of fraud so extensive it would take forensic accountants months to unravel. But the most damning evidence was a series of emails I found buried in the development correspondence. Communications between Beatrice and the original developer about maximizing revenue streams through creative fee structures. Creative fee structures like charging homeowners for road maintenance the county provided for free. As I drove home with a phone full of evidence, one thought kept racing through my mind. Beatrice wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was a criminal who'd been stealing from her neighbors for over a decade. And she'd picked a fight with my ranch because she was desperate to keep anyone from looking too closely at where all that money had gone. The irony was beautiful. By attacking my property so aggressively, by filing so many false reports and making so much noise, She'd drawn exactly the kind of attention she'd been trying to avoid. Every government agency she'd sicked on me would now be looking at her activities, too. Every false report she'd filed was evidence of systematic harassment. Every fee she'd collected illegally was documented theft. She'd been so focused on destroying me that she'd built her own gallows brick by stolen brick. Time to spring the trap she'd walked herself into. That night, I spread the evidence across our dining room table like a battle plan. Celeste and the girls gathered around as I explained what I'd discovered in the courthouse basement. So, she's been stealing for 15 years? River asked, her eyes wide as she processed the numbers. Over $1 million, I confirmed. And now she's trying to bury the evidence by getting me off this land. Sage leaned over the financial documents. Her accounting class is paying off. Dad, if she's been this systematic about the theft, she's got to have backup plans, exit strategies. Smart kid. She was thinking like a tactician already. That's when I realized I couldn't fight this alone anymore. This wasn't just about defending my ranch. This was about exposing a criminal conspiracy that had been robbing an entire community for over a decade. Time to assemble a proper team. My first call went to Sarah Sutton, a constitutional property rights attorney Jake had recommended. Sarah specialized in cases where local governments overstepped their authority, and she had a reputation for taking corrupt officials apart in court. Mr. Blackwood, she said after reviewing the photos I'd sent, this isn't just embezzlement. This is organized fraud using government systems. We're talking federal charges. Next, I contacted Marcus Webb, a forensic accountant who'd worked with the FBI before going private. Marcus could trace financial irregularities through the kind of shell companies and creative bookkeeping that made my head spin. The pattern you're showing me, Marcus explained over the phone, suggests someone with sophisticated knowledge of both HOA law and financial systems. This person knew exactly how to structure the theft to avoid detection. The third piece of my team was Tommy Rodriguez, an IT specialist who'd helped me set up the ranch cameras. Tommy could recover deleted files, trace electronic communications, and find digital evidence that paper trails couldn't hide. If she's been covering her tracks, Tommy said she's been doing it electronically. Email deletions, file modifications, digital payment records, all of that leaves forensic footprints. But the most important addition to my team wasn't a professional. It was my neighbors. See, when people discover they've been robbed for 15 years, they get motivated fast. Within a week, I had 23 homeowners who'd done their own math and realized their road maintenance fees had been financing Beatrice's BMW payments. Eleanor Martinez, whose husband had served 2 tours in Iraq, became our unofficial coordinator. We've been funding this woman's lifestyle while she calls us stupid, Eleanor said, her voice sharp with anger. Time to show her how stupid we really aren't. The coalition grew daily. Jim Patterson, a retired insurance investigator who'd noticed discrepancies in HOA financial reports years earlier. Linda Washington, an accountant who'd been asking uncomfortable questions about fee increases. Bob Stevens, whose construction company had never been contacted for any of the road work they'd supposedly been paying for. By the end of the second week, we had enough evidence to fill a prosecutor's wet dreams. But I knew we needed more than just documents. We needed Beatrice to expose herself publicly in front of witnesses who couldn't be intimidated or bought off. That's when Sarah suggested the perfect trap. Texas law requires HOA to hold annual financial transparency meetings. She explained any member can demand a full accounting of expenditures. If we coordinate the request properly, she'll be legally required to present all financial records in a public forum. The beauty was simple. Beatrice would have to choose between admitting the theft or lying under oath in front of dozens of witnesses. Meanwhile, I had my own preparations to make. All those months of Beatrice driving through my property had taught me her patterns, her timing, her routes, every camera angle, every approach vector, every blind spot where she felt safe conducting her illegal business. In my workshop, surrounded by the smell of welding metal and machine oil, I began constructing what would become the most satisfying piece of engineering in my life. A gate that looked exactly like the wooden barrier she'd been destroying for months, but with a steel-reinforced core that could stop a tank. The spike strips were trickier. They needed to be retractable, remote-controlled, and positioned precisely to disable her BMW without causing injury. I'd learned enough about tire damage systems during my military service to know the difference between stopping a vehicle and creating a dangerous accident. The camera upgrades were the final piece. Tommy helped me install a 4K recording system with cloud backup and motion-triggered activation. Every angle covered, every moment documented, every piece of evidence automatically preserved where Beatrix's corrupt friends couldn't destroy it. As I tested the remote activation system for the 100th time, Celeste found me in the workshop. "You sure about this, Easy? Once you spring this trap, there's no going back." I looked out at the ranch that had been in my family for 3 generations, thinking about all the families Beatrice had been stealing from, all the lies she'd spread, all the government resources she'd wasted on her petty revenge. "She made this choice when she decided to steal from everyone," I said. "I'm just giving her the ending she deserves." 2 weeks into our investigation, Beatrice realized she was being hunted. The first sign came on a Monday morning when she arrived for her usual trespassing routine. But instead of her typical arrogant cruise through my pasture, she drove slowly, scanning the fence line like she was looking for something. Through my binoculars, I could see her checking her mirrors constantly. That smug confidence replaced by nervous energy. She'd figured out someone was digging into her finances. Tuesday brought her counterstrike. Marcus called me at dawn, his voice tight with urgency. "Ezra, they tried to wipe the HOA financial servers last night. Professional job. Someone who knew exactly which files to target. If I hadn't been monitoring their system remotely, we'd have lost everything. But you saved it. Every byte. Better yet, the deletion attempt created a forensic trail leading straight back to Beatrix's home computer. She just handed us evidence of obstruction of justice." But Beatrice wasn't done covering her tracks. That afternoon, Eleanor Martinez called with news that made my stomach drop. "She's offering settlements," Ella Laner said, her voice shaking with anger. $50,000 per household to drop out of the investigation and sign non-disclosure agreements. $50,000. With 23 families involved, that was over $1 million, almost exactly what she'd stolen over 15 years. She was trying to buy silence with the community's own money. Anyone taking the deal? 3 families so far. The Johnsons are worried about legal costs, and the Reeds just want this over with. But the rest of us, Eleanor's voice hardened, we want justice, not hush money. Wednesday evening brought the most brazen move yet. I was reviewing camera footage when I heard engines in my driveway. Not Beatrix's BMW, but 2 county vehicles. Inspector Johnson stepped out of the first truck, followed by Deputy Danny Johnson and a man I didn't recognize wearing a suit that screamed federal bureaucrat. "Mr. Blackwood," Inspector Johnson called out, his voice carrying that fake authority corrupt officials use when they're desperate. "We have reports of illegal modifications to your property that could endanger public safety." "What modifications?" The federal agent stepped forward. "I'm Agent Reynolds, EPA. We've received complaints about unauthorized construction projects that may violate environmental regulations. We need to inspect your workshop and any recent additions to your fence line." My workshop, where the steel-reinforced gate components were waiting for final assembly. I could smell Beatrix's desperation in the evening air, that same sharp metallic scent of fear I'd learned to recognize in combat zones. She was throwing every government agency she could find at me, hoping one of them would shut down my operation before I could expose her. "You have a warrant?" I asked. Agent Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "We're hoping for voluntary cooperation to avoid the need for legal compulsion." Translation: they had nothing concrete, just Beatrice pulling strings through her network of corrupt contacts. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying the command authority that 20 years of Marine service had burned into my vocal cords. "You're welcome to inspect anything on my property, but you'll do it with proper warrants, proper documentation, and my attorney present." They left empty-handed, but the message was clear. Beatrice was escalating to direct intimidation. That night, I moved the gate components to Jake's property 20 m away. If she wanted to play games with government inspections, I'd keep my trap preparations somewhere her corrupt network couldn't reach. Thursday brought the final desperate gambit. I was checking cattle when I heard glass breaking near the house. Racing back, I found our kitchen window shattered and a brick lying on the floor with a note wrapped around it. "Drop the investigation or your family pays the price." The smell of fear, sweat, and adrenaline filled our kitchen as Celeste and the girls gathered around the evidence. But instead of intimidation, I felt something else. Clarity. Beatrice had just escalated from financial crimes to threatening my family. Any sympathy I might have had for a desperate woman covering up old mistakes evaporated like morning dew in August heat. That evening, Tommy's electronic surveillance paid off. His monitoring systems caught two figures approaching our property at 3 a.m. dressed in dark clothing and carrying what looked like containers of liquid. They were planning to vandalize our ranch equipment. I let them proceed while the cameras recorded everything. Tommy tracked their vehicle back to a parking lot where they met with Beatrice herself. Cash changing hands in full view of our infrared cameras. Criminal conspiracy, vandalism for hire, witness intimidation. She'd just added federal charges to her growing collection of felonies. Friday morning, I called Sarah Sutton with the overnight evidence. Ezra, she said after reviewing the footage, she's handed us everything we need for a federal prosecution, but be careful. Desperate criminals make dangerous decisions. As if summoned by Sarah's warning, my phone rang. Beatrix's voice, shrill with panic, filled the speaker. I know what you're planning, Blackwood. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Drop this vendetta, or I'll destroy everything you care about. The irony was beautiful. She thought I was planning something against her. She had no idea she was about to drive straight into the most elegant trap I'd ever constructed. The final week before Beatrix's destruction began with her most desperate move yet. Monday morning, I woke to find for sale signs planted across my fence line like some kind of deranged crop. Not just 1 or 2 17 signs advertising my ranch for immediate sale at 50 cents on the dollar. The phone started ringing before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Real estate agents, investors, even a developer from Dallas asking about the distressed agricultural property in Millbrook Springs. Sir, the listing shows serious financial difficulties and environmental violations, one caller explained. We're prepared to make a cash offer today to help resolve your legal troubles. Financial difficulties, environmental violations. Beatrice had created a completely fictional emergency sale using her real estate connections, hoping to panic me into actually selling. But that was just the opening move. Tuesday brought the nuclear option. She filed a bogus assault lawsuit claiming I'd physically threatened her during our last confrontation. According to her sworn statement, I'd brandished farming implements in a menacing manner and made specific threats of bodily harm. Farming implements like the fence post I'd been holding while explaining property boundaries. The temporary restraining order arrived that afternoon, legally prohibiting me from coming within 500 feet of any HOA property, which according to her creative interpretation, included the road she'd been using to cross my land. Sarah Sutton called within an hour. Ezra, this is brilliant legal maneuvering. She's trying to make it legally impossible for you to interfere with her trespassing. Can she do that? Temporarily, yes. But she's just created a permanent legal record of filing false statements under oath. Every lie in that complaint is now documented perjury. Wednesday morning brought the ultimate irony. Beatrice organized an emergency HOA meeting to vote on using remaining community funds to purchase my ranch for the public good. I watched the live stream from my kitchen as she stood before 30 homeowners, her voice cracking with fake emotion. This disturbed individual has terrorized our community for months, she declared, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. For the safety of our families and the preservation of our property values, we must take decisive action. The vote was 16-14 in favor of the purchase, exactly the margin you'd expect when half the community was getting paid to stay quiet. But Thursday morning brought the moment I'd been waiting for. My cameras captured Beatrix's BMW approaching at 7:15, right on schedule. But this time, she wasn't alone. A black SUV followed her along with 2 more cars filled with what looked like contractors carrying equipment. They were planning to remove my gate permanently. I watched from Jake's property through binoculars as Beatrice directed the operation like a military commander. The contractors had cutting torches, heavy machinery, even a small bulldozer to grade the road smooth after destroying my fence line. She wasn't just trespassing anymore. She was eliminating any barrier to her illegal access route. But she'd picked the perfect day for her final violation. The steel-reinforced gate was installed and ready. The spike strips were positioned and tested. The cameras were recording everything in 4K clarity. Most importantly, the audience was in place. Sarah had coordinated with the district attorney's office to have investigators present for what we called a documentation exercise. Marcus was positioned with financial evidence ready for immediate presentation. Tommy had live-streamed access to all camera feeds. Eleanor Martinez had organized 16 homeowners to witness whatever happened. Even better, Channel 7 News was en route after Sarah tipped them off about a major HOA corruption story breaking this morning. At exactly 7:14 a.m., I activated the gate's remote system and settled back to watch justice in motion. The BMW approached at its usual aggressive speed. Beatrice clearly expecting to blow through my flimsy wooden gate one final time. The contractors followed close behind, tools ready to finish the job. What she hit instead was steel-reinforced hardwood designed to stop a military vehicle. The sound of impact echoed across the valley like a gunshot, metal crumpling, glass shattering, steam hissing from a destroyed radiator. The BMW's front end folded like an accordion, airbags deploying in a cloud of white powder that mixed with the morning mist. The spike strips activated a split second later, shredding the tires of the following vehicles as they tried to brake. 3 expensive cars suddenly transformed into immobilized wrecks scattered across my property like battlefield casualties. Through the binoculars, I could see Beatrice staggering out of her destroyed BMW. Her perfect composure finally cracked. Mascara streaked her cheeks like war paint, and that expensive blazer was torn and dirty. The contractors were shouting, pointing at their damaged equipment and ruined vehicles. The smell of radiator fluid and burnt rubber drifted across the morning air like the sweetest perfume I'd ever experienced. But the most beautiful sight was the news van cresting the hill. Cameras ready to document Beatrix's final humiliation. She'd driven herself straight into the trap exactly as I'd planned. Now came the best part, watching her try to explain this disaster to the world. The emergency HOA meeting that evening became the most watched live stream in Millbrook Springs history. The community center buzzed with an energy I hadn't felt since deployment briefings. That electric tension when everyone knows something big is about to explode. 150 homeowners packed into seats designed for 80 with standing room, filled by neighbors who'd driven from 3 counties away after the news broke. Channel 7's cameras captured everything as Beatrice limped to the podium, still wearing her torn blazer from the morning's automotive disaster. Her left eye was developing a spectacular shiner from the airbag deployment, and she moved like every step hurt. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice lacking its usual commanding authority. "We're here to address the malicious attack on HOA members that occurred this morning." Malicious attack. I had to admire her commitment to the lie, even with her BMW still being towed off my property. Sarah Sutton stood up in the front row, looking like justice incarnate in her sharp business suit. "Miss Thornfield, before we discuss this morning's events, I believe the community deserves transparency about HOA finances. That's not the purpose of this meeting." "Actually, it is." Sarah held up a thick folder of documents. Texas Property Code Section 209.005 requires HOAs to provide detailed financial accounting upon member request. We're requesting it now. Marcus Webb stepped forward with the projector and laptop, his forensic accountant credentials displayed prominently on his business card as he handed it to the live stream moderator. "Mrs. Thornfield," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who testified against organized crime. "Can you explain where $126,000 in road maintenance fees collected over 15 years has gone?" The room went dead silent. You could hear dust settling on the fluorescent light fixtures. Beatrix's face cycled through expressions like a broken slot machine, confusion, anger, panic, then a desperate attempt at indignation. Those are confidential financial matters that require proper review. "There's nothing confidential about theft," Eleanor Martinez called out from the audience. "We paid those fees. We deserve to know where our money went." The projector screen lit up with bank records, check images, and a financial flowchart that traced money from homeowner accounts to shell companies and personal expenses. Marcus narrated each transaction with the clinical precision of a pathologist describing a murder. "Shell company payments to Millbrook Landscaping," he announced, pointing to the screen. "A company that exists only on paper with no employees, no equipment, and no actual landscaping contracts." The audience murmur grew to an angry rumble. People were pulling out phones, calculating their own losses, realizing they'd been funding Beatrix's lifestyle for over a decade. "Luxury vehicle payments," Marcus continued, charged to the HOA as community transportation. Home renovation expenses listed as office improvements. Even a vacation to Europe billed as property management conference attendance. With each revelation, Beatrice seemed to shrink further into herself. The commanding presence that had terrorized homeowners for years was evaporating like morning dew under the blazing sun of public scrutiny. But the final blow came when Tommy Rodriguez connected his laptop to the sound system. This morning's incident was recorded from multiple angles. He announced as the screens filled with crystal-clear footage of Beatrice's BMW deliberately ramming through my gate. The video showed everything. Her aggressive approach, the moment of impact, her staggering emergence from the wreckage. But most damning was the audio captured by sensitive microphones of her screaming at the contractors. "You idiots. I paid you to remove that fence, not crash into it. Now everyone will see what we were doing. Paid you to remove that fence." Proof of conspiracy to destroy private property recorded in her own voice and broadcast to 150 witnesses. The room exploded in angry voices, people shouting questions, demanding resignations, calling for criminal charges. The live stream chat was moving so fast, it looked like digital rainfall. That's when Detective Rodriguez from the county sheriff's office stood up at the back of the room. Beatrice Thornfield. His voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy to commit vandalism, and filing false reports." The handcuffs clicking around her wrists created a moment of perfect silence, broken only by the mechanical whir of news cameras capturing every second. As Rodriguez read her rights, Beatrice's composure finally shattered completely. "You don't understand," she screamed, mascara streaming down her face. "That rancher is the criminal. He set a trap. He tried to kill me." Detective Rodriguez paused in his Miranda recitation. "Ma'am, the video clearly shows you deliberately driving through a clearly marked private gate on someone else's property. The trap you hit was a property owner's legal right to protect his land." The perp walk through the community center became the defining image of the whole scandal. Beatrice, once the untouchable queen of Millbrook Estates, shuffled past 150 neighbors she'd been robbing for years. As the doors closed behind her, I stood up and addressed the crowd. "Folks, this was never about my ranch. This was about all of us refusing to let bullies steal our dignity, our money, and our peace of mind. Today we prove that ordinary people can beat corrupt systems when we work together." The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes and probably woke up cattle in the next county. 6 months later, Beatrice Thornfield was wearing orange prison scrubs instead of designer blazers, and my ranch gate had become the most famous piece of farm equipment in Texas. The legal dominoes fell beautifully. 5 years in state prison for embezzlement and fraud. Federal HOA charges when prosecutors discovered her corruption network spanned 3 counties. Law license permanently revoked. The BMW that once terrorized my cattle became evidence locker 247B. Then auction lot 18. And finally, in the sweetest irony possible, a very expensive chicken coop on Jimmy Patterson's farm. But the real victory was watching our community heal. The reformed HOA led by President Eleanor Martinez implemented bulletproof financial transparency. Every transaction documented, every contract bid competitively, every fee justified in plain English. Monthly reports so clear even Roosevelt could probably understand them if he could read. Over $1 million flowed back to homeowners who'd been funding Beatrice's lifestyle. The Johnsons paid off crushing medical debt. The Reeds bought that dream RV. 3 families sent kids to college who thought they couldn't afford it. Money that had been stolen from kitchen tables across Millbrook Springs finally made it back home. My ranch exhaled back into its natural rhythm. Morning air smelled sweet again, without diesel fumes cutting through the peas. Roosevelt resumed his dignified patrol of the pasture, occasionally lifting his massive head to snort approvingly at the gate that had made him internet famous. The girls graduated as local celebrities. River's college essay, How My Dad's Ranch Gate Taught Me About Justice, got her into 3 universities with full scholarships. Sage turned her scandal documentation into a business ethics project that won state competition and changed her major to forensic accounting. Celeste's veterinary practice exploded with business from neighbors seeking forgiveness. We should have known better than to trust a woman who charged $5 to trespass on someone else's land became the unofficial community apology. But our little rancher revolution rippled far beyond Texas. The Karen meets. Ranchgate video spawned a digital empire of justice porn. 20 million views and counting. Agricultural groups made it required viewing for property rights seminars. Law schools added our case to HOA corruption curricula. 12 states launched investigations that uncovered similar embezzlement schemes worth millions. I used my settlement money to create the Homeowner Justice Fund, providing legal aid to families fighting HOA tyranny nationwide. We've exposed fraud in over 40 communities, connecting desperate homeowners with attorneys like Sarah Sutton and investigators like Marcus Webb. Rural America is fighting back one corrupt board at a time. The fund partners with Texas A&M to teach property owners their rights knowledge that could have saved us months of harassment if I'd known it sooner. Education is the best defense against petty tyrants who count on ignorance and intimidation. That steel-reinforced gate now stands as a monument to the power of patience, planning, and proper documentation. The small plaque beside it reads, "Trespassers will be educated about property rights violently if necessary." Visitors come from across the country to see the Karen Crusher that ended 15 years of theft. They leave understanding that sometimes the best response to bullies isn't backing down. It's engineering a solution that lets them destroy themselves with their own arrogance. Our annual Property Rights and Barbecue Festival has become a pilgrimage site for freedom-loving Americans. Last year raised $75,000 for the Justice Fund, while proving that good food and righteous anger make excellent partners. Every morning at 7:15, when Beatrice's BMW used to shatter the peace, I now hear something perfect. Cattle lowing contentedly, wind whispering through prairie grass, and the absolute silence of a neighborhood bully who finally learned that some people engineer their revenge with precision and patience. Here's what I learned from this whole nightmare. Bullies count on decent people being too polite, too busy, or too scared to fight back properly. But when ordinary folks decide they've had enough and apply intelligence, documentation, and community solidarity, even the most corrupt systems crumble like BMW front ends hitting steel-reinforced reality. The most beautiful sound in the world isn't bird song or baby laughter. It's the complete silence of a tyrant who's finally been stopped. Share your HOA horror stories in the comments below. You're not alone in this fight, and together we're building a network of communities that refuse to be bullied. If this story of rural justice and community triumph fired you up, smash that subscribe button for HOA Tales, because somewhere out there, another Karen is about to meet her match, and you definitely don't want to miss that beautiful collision.